validating or invalidating assumptions that you made. And that's all it's really supposed to be, I think. I wish I could rattle off all the lines of the Agile Manifesto, but I do
you don't
love
have
that
them tattooed on your hand or anything.
Yeah, let me check. Hold on.
Hey, I'm Nick.
And I'm Graeme.
And this is the Dude, Where's My Code podcast. And this is episode 3 of season 2. Graeme, you and I were just chatting about agile processes, paradigms, and stuff for how we organize teams and go through work. And I thought that was a really awesome chat.
We have a bit of a shared background in having chances to go through agile transformations and apply it in different ways, both together and maybe on our own separate paths as well. So it was neat to just reflect on the different ways that you can think about agile, the different ways you can apply processes and iterative change to your team and the way your team approaches development.
Absolutely. And Graeme, I know this time I grilled you a little bit more than usual, so I'm probably due for that next time. But I think you guys are going to love this one. If you want to do us a favor, like and subscribe to the channel, I think that would be awesome. And yeah, please enjoy, and we'll see you on the next episode. It's like exactly behind the arm for my camera, so I was like, what's happening? But it's there, so not to worry. Yeah, I think like for me, what comes to mind, I know I was just saying in terms of like agility, like I don't really have the same type of agility that probably, at least when you and I were working together, like that feeling of, I don't know, like we can try to optimize a process to make it such that we are more nimble and getting things done faster, more effectively. Like I don't really have such a thing anymore.
Right.
But your status is a little different. I know you've just done a little bit of reorg on your team in terms of, like we were chatting before about just the focus areas, right? Instead of everyone just doing everything independently, like you've restructured around that and you're kind of going through some other, I don't want to say growing pains is the wrong word, going through some growth and some change.
Yeah. And I don't know if this was the right thing to do, but I took a pretty big swing at let's reorg the way our teams are set up, our people are organized. Let's change the development processes or the agile frameworks that we're choosing to use as part of that. And let's change the software that we use to track our like tasks. And let's add some new processes and let's add some new guidebooks and guidelines. So it's like a pretty
you blew it all up.
Like just change it all at once. I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not, but it became kind of this thing of, well, if we're going to change the processes, we should have tooling that supports those processes. And if we're going to change that, then let's like revamp the states that tickets go through. And if we're going to do that, maybe we want to change the way we handle like interrupts, and we should build a process for that. And so it kind of went from let's lay the team out differently to let's lay the team out differently, let's work differently, let's use different tools. So
I can see that being like valid as long as you weren't like, we just threw out like something we felt like was super effective. And no, I'm not trying to suggest that your team was not effective before, but if you were changing everything and sitting there going, well, we knew we had something pretty good and we were really happy with it, that would seem like kind of a, I don't know, like maybe a not so great trade-off, maybe iterate on it. But if you were like, we're about to revamp everything, why not revamp everything? Then it seems okay.
I think when I showed up a year ago, if I had said, we're switching to Jira, we're switching to Scrums, we're changing these processes, it probably would have been met with more resistance and criticality. Like,
fair, okay.
Who are you, man? We have a way of working, like, just because, you know, it's not what you used to do. But given that I sat for a year observing, experiencing, making minor tweaks, and coming to this conclusion, I think that allowed me to formulate a stronger position on why, and make a stronger case for it, and then make that transition in a way where we knew what the challenges had been and what we were trying to address, and now we can check if the changes we have made address that, and kind of go from there.
Well, out of curiosity, when this was brought up to the team, because I agree with that kind of philosophy, that mindset of like, I know that we've worked in places, or either together or separately, where someone comes in and says, here's a change. And I mean, if the idea was good, it's still going to be met with resistance no matter what. So going into something new and feeling like, hey, I'm going to observe this and kind of try to, if you're going to make changes, it's going to be rolled out slowly kind of thing. But did you find that when this was brought up to the team that there was a lot of resistance after a year, or did you feel that you made some suggested changes, even if it was a lot, and people were feeling sort of, maybe we should be doing this, like it's not so bad?
The way I went about it was being pretty confident in the direction I wanted to go, vetting it with some leadership peers, being confident enough to go to my leads and kind of say, here's my proposal, let's talk about it. And they did a fantastic job of raising a lot of questions and pointing out areas that they thought were risk. Hey, maybe you're fixing this challenge, but do you realize that you might be introducing problems here or whatever? Really good job of that. We had some good discussions about it. Once we were pretty confident that we had ironed out enough of that to move forward, and basically my North Star was, I don't want to revamp this again anytime soon. So while we may not have all of the answers, let's be confident that this is taking us in a direction that we can commit to, even if we have to change and tweak and adjust and adapt. And so we got to that point, and then we pitched it to the team, the rest of the team members. And I think it was definitely welcomed. And there was, as I perceived, a fair amount of excitement about it.
Cool.
But there were some really interesting questions or I don't want to say like challenges or protests raised, but it was interesting. The most important one, I think, was when a team member said, so we are switching from kind of like a Kanban model to more like a sprint-based Scrum model. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, we used to do a Scrum-based model before you were here. And then we switched to Kanban to solve a bunch of problems we were experiencing with Scrum. What makes you think that going back to Scrum, why won't we experience the same problems we left it in the first place?
Great question.
Really, really good question. And I'm glad that I knew that Scrum had been attempted before, and I'm glad I knew the reasons why it failed and why we were able to address them this time around, because it was helpful to say, totally, I hear you. Last time it was implemented, the team was a little bit smaller than we are today, but the org had a lot more uncertainty around things. And so what I understand you encountered, I wasn't here, was that so many important requests were constantly hitting the team that it was always distracting from the sprint goals. And so the conclusion was we probably need to work off a Kanban model so it's easier to reprioritize work at any given time and not at sprint boundaries.
Because that seems to be the nature of the business, right? Because if the business, and you can influence this in different ways, but truly, because I've worked with you in models like this, where you have lots of different priorities that are constantly coming in. You can, as a team, you can kind of push back and challenge and raise awareness. But ultimately, if it's business priorities changing, if you are unable to adapt to that, then what's the answer? Do you say to people truly making important business decisions, sorry, that's just not how software engineering works? Or do you say, if this is how the business needs to work to be successful, and you can get on board and you trust in your leadership that's driving that, let's come up with a way to do it.
Totally. And that's where we've achieved a certain level of organizational maturity, I guess, where we can say we can fit things into sprint processes. We're also a big enough team that we've got 2 sub-teams working on their own separate sprints. We staggered them by a week so that there's only ever the maximum amount of time until the request could be addressed after a sprint starts is a week. Or
Very cool.
Like the shortest turnaround, as opposed to like if you have 2-week sprints, it's, hey, we just started a sprint, so you're going to have to wait 2 weeks. The shortest, the longest they'll ever have to wait for a high priority thing is 1 week with the staggered sprint. So we kind of addressed it that way. And we addressed it by saying, yeah, we've committed as an engineering group and as an organization to not have so many kind of disjointed priorities and tasks coming at the team, but to focus a lot more of that. And so sprints will help us as a team do that, and it will help provide a framework for the rest of the organization to commit to not bombarding the team with kind of disparate tasks and requests at any given time. So
that's very cool. I'm a little bit interested. I don't want to just like grill you on your choices and such, but I know from talking with you that you've expressed in the past like that something like Scrum or sprint boundaries can feel artificial. Like, you know, we've committed to something and that means that it must wrap up within a boundary, and as such it feels artificial. Every piece of work that goes in has to make it within some period of time, because technically things spilling over the sprint boundary, like that's not supposed to be happening. Of course it will, but going from like Kanban seems to help address that. It's a little bit more fluid. You talked about sort of the needs of the business requiring that. I'm curious how you, and I'm not saying you just like totally changed your mind. Obviously you did an analysis. I know this about you, that you would go into this thinking about how this works. So what is it, and if you don't mind me asking, what is it about this change where something like the sprint boundary for things being committed feels okay again? Or, you know, how is that balanced out?
I do think it's silly to say we have to fit things neatly into a 2-week box. I think I've complained about this before. My biggest complaint is that having sprints of any length, a week or 2 weeks or whatever, feels counterintuitive to continuous delivery practices, because you're effectively waterfalling every 2 weeks and delivering things on a 2-week cadence. And so that's my big critique. And I prefer tasks in sprint to be stack ranked and like delivered in the same model of, you know, stop starting and start finishing. And I expect the team to move entire tasks across the entire flow instead of just pull everything into in progress and complete nothing in the sprint. So there's at least that, which is, hey, even in that 2 weeks, we are delivering things in priority order. We've put a 2-week boundary on attempting to theme work and some framework around 2 weeks forces us to plan, or reprioritize and replan what we will do next, and forces us to do retros and reflect on the way we worked, which you can absolutely plug into Kanban, but it helps. And I think the one thing is, this doesn't work for, I've gone back and forth with different teams throughout my career on whether I want to do this or not, which is, it's possible to get into a state, depending on how you're using Kanban, where it kind of feels accepted to just say, the work will get done when it gets done. And you can impose some like urgency, and you can impose efficiency metrics and drive people towards those, but it still has this like sense of things are just kind of flowing, and they move through the flow at the pace they move through, where the Scrum or sprint model just puts a little bit of a, I don't know if I should use this term, but like sometimes when I'm talking about it, I talk about like a bit of like fire under the ass in terms of like, hey, there's like some looming date, arbitrary or not.
I'd like to pause on that for a moment, because I totally get that. And I know that your intention, and this is why you paused, right? Your intention's not to say that we have to make everyone fearful that you have to be overworked and stuff like that. But I have noticed that truly, I would say more junior engineers in particular. I have had conversations with more junior engineers where having some amount of structure, milestone, urgency is almost too strong of a word, but something where they have like a time in their head to associate with the amount of work. And truly without it, I've heard feedback where they will say like, I just don't know if I'm on track to do it. So I kind of just, it's almost like they coast or they slack without meaning to, because they just don't have a sense. Now, you could say, I'm just going to make up things, right? You could have a work item that they're assigned to and say, well, I want you to do it in 2 days. And they might say, okay, get into it, and start to panic and be like, oh my goodness, this is going to take me longer than 2 days. And I think as long as you're not setting them up to be like, well, you better get it done or else, but for them to have a space to say, hey, I don't think I can get this done in 2 days. You go, oh, okay, well, how long is it going to take? And just getting them to feel that out, I think, is important. But without any time structure, at least the feedback I've received from more junior people is that they go, well, it must not be a priority if there's no time. I will find the next thing that has a time and work towards that.
Right. I think that's probably a pretty important observation. I frame it only subtly differently, which is we do expect engineers to balance kind of a bunch of other things. So,
Sure.
Hey, field incoming questions to the team. Make sure you're documenting changes to process or changes to the features that you're working on. Make sure you're upskilling one way or another. Make sure you're performing code reviews for your peers. And so in that Kanban model, that lack of urgency, for a better word, is what's the right balance. Other things can take more priority, and it's okay because I'll just when I come back to my task, I'll come back to it and deliver it. And the sprint boundary being arbitrary or not does provide a bit of helpful framework, like you said, around okay, well, I can go and do some of these other things that are expected of me, but I know, like, I think I have this much time remaining to invest in this task, and I'm gonna have to work hard to make it fit or not, and that can help guide how much time.
If the team is very cohesive and understands how to work well together, it's not a matter of as entirely as individuals, oh, I can just get my work done. But truly, in stand-up meetings or however else you're syncing, people can look and say, well, we committed to all of this work. And I feel comfortable if I take a bit of extra time in this part of the sprint, or, to be able to upskill and read about some things or try something out, versus, the sprint dynamics are changing and they're going, oh, well, maybe my work is, I can easily complete it, but I know, like, Joe and Sally, I'm not very creative with names. Joe and Sally are, the work that they've been trying to tackle is like, that actually seems like it could be getting blocked or slowing down. Like, maybe I should pause my upskilling efforts and see if I can tap into that to help out.
That's my other big beef with Scrum when it's implemented poorly, is the type of team that is working in a sprint but pre-assigning tasks to individuals, and then individuals will get their tasks in the sprint done and look at stuff that's lagging behind and say, I got my work done. That's always a big,
let me go to the backlog, I'll just get the next thing off the backlog, someone else is doing the stuff in the sprint.
Oh yeah, that's great.
That's just a thing. Yeah.
There is one thing that we keep saying that I think we should point out and
Sure.
maybe be wary of. It was raised to me a couple years ago. Was it years ago now? Maybe.
We're getting old, so.
It must have been. Yeah. I mean, pandemic times, so add 2 years to however long I think it was. I use the term like committed a lot when talking about sprints, and it's because we used to talk about like the team commits to a set of work and points. Okay. And I learned that when I took my Scrum Master certification, but Agile has since evolved, and we actually don't use the term like sprint commitment anymore, because it implied we had all the correct information up front at the start of the sprint, and through thick and thin, we are committed to delivering the stories that we said we would deliver this sprint. And that's really not actually the goal. The goal is like, hey, this is the intention or the outcomes we want to arrive at, and here's the tickets that we think support that.
Is there a different phrase that gets used then instead? Because I think I've never thought about it that way, and I think it's great to call out. When I think sprint commitment, the way that you described it in the latter part is sort of how I was thinking about it, but that seems to not be the case. So that's interesting. Is there another phrase then that gets used?
There is, and I'm just trying to look it up because I was
Sprint probably shoulds.
I was corrected and then clearly didn't.
No worries. No worries.
I think mostly it's about, I don't know what the new phrase is, but it's certainly trying to reframe it around committing to a sprint goal and not like specific task completion.
Okay. So almost like an alignment, a sprint, you're agreeing on what is a priority and the spirit of the sprint versus...
Yeah, you're committing to your goal to change something, but the difference is like you're not committing to the tickets that were pulled into the sprint. The idea is you're committing to like the spirit of, this is what we're attempting to deliver. These are what we think right now are the things we need to do to deliver that. So it's like subtly different.
It's not, of course, it's not the exact same, but I think about when we talk about objectives and key results, OKRs, you set a key result and like objectives and key results not to be specific work items that you must get completed, but you're talking about a metric that you want to move. So in this case, like I said, I know it's not the exact same thing, but this concept of this is the goal, this is the thing, like the direction we're trying to move in. If the work items that you're pulling in about specific implementations of things don't necessarily line up, you shouldn't be punished for it. It should be, well, are we moving in the direction we said we wanted to? Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, minor deviation, but I think it's worth calling out.
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
If not, someone will call me out on it.
Someone will do it.
As happened before. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we really wanted to talk about today was this idea of it's pretty easy, either if you're new to Agile or you've only experienced Agile in one or two contexts, and maybe it was like well formed and set up by the time you got there, and so your experience has been in kind of a structure that's been in place and been operating for some time and with some maturity. I want to make sure we touch on the fact that it's probably not the right way of thinking, even when we talk about things like Scrum and Kanban, and I mean, people love, like, I think Scrumban has become this like thing. I thought like someone I worked with made it up once, but I guess not. They must have grabbed it from somewhere, or many people came to the same conclusion at the same time. I don't know, but like, there's the reason that term even exists is because people recognized that their processes didn't fit nicely into the things that has been dictated as Kanban processes and the like things that have been dictated as what makes Scrum. And that I forget the exact number, but there's like 30 or 40 different frameworks that fit under the Agile umbrella. And they all have like their merits. But I think at the end of the day, to analyze a list of 30 or 40 or will it down to 3 or 4, you shouldn't feel like you're twisting and bending yourself to conform to one of the frameworks. And it's really important that you're able to look at what the merits are and take the best of what works for you, but still just try and implement under the Agile spirit, right?
Are you trying to tell me that if you want to be Agile, you are allowed to deviate from rigid structure? That sounds totally bizarre.
One of my favorite, like, newest processes, this is super interesting, is like Basecamp's got, they published a process that they developed they call Shape Up. It's great, and it has so many tenets in it that are derived from Agile core tenets, but I've never once seen anybody reference Shape Up as an Agile framework, the same way you would with like Kanban and Scrum and all these things. And I don't know exactly why that is, but when you look at the frameworks that they've put in place, it is very much allowing organizations to be able to like pivot and shift their direction, but provide some sort of framework around how they're going to think about and deliver their products. And I just think it's very interesting that not only can you go and Google lists of Agile frameworks, but there are so many other things out there that people are having success with that probably fit under that Agile umbrella. And the reason that these things get developed, the reason a process like Shape Up would even exist, is because an org took things that they liked and like meandered through developing a process that worked for them, and then was so thrilled with its success that they were willing to write an ebook and go out and say, this is a process that works. So,
and they probably didn't write the ebook because they were trying to go collect money from people to buy their ebook, but they probably wrote it because they were excited about the effectiveness of it.
It's free, so I hope they're not trying to make money from it.
There we go.
But
it's not working.
Yeah,
that's I think, to chime in, like, some of my philosophy on, I know I've told you this, and I don't know how, if I have said it on, you know, our podcast or not, but like, when we talk about Agile, I've just stopped saying Agile. I don't like saying it because, and not because I'm against the idea, but I think it just carries so much potential context with it that may or may not exist. And people start to, well, you're saying Agile. Okay, so is that Scrum? Is that Kanban? Is that one of these million flavors? And really, I just default back to continuous improvement. And to me, I don't like having a starting point of something. It can be helpful, but I think as long as you have some type of checkpoint, whatever cadence to be decided by the team, some type of cadence to be able to reflect and say, how are we doing things? What should we try next? What's working? What's not? Like and again, it's like a retrospective, but even how you ask the questions about what's working and what's not, like, literally challenge anything and make suggestions, but it's all about experimenting. And the reason I like this is because even with, it's probably like scientifically proven or something that the more cohesive a team is, the longer they're together working on things, probably the easier it is for them to be effective and work together. I don't have a pile of data showing that, but I'd like to think that that's reality. So even
it's the cycle of high performing teams: storming, norming, perform.
Yeah,
forming, storming, norming, performing. And to get into the performing quadrant, you have to have invested a bunch of time. And then, so yes, I'm on board.
I don't have the data, but I'm pretty sure it's been proven in some capacity. But what I think is true as well is that, say you have a cohesive team that works well together, if you start to if you start to change the projects, the products, the things you're working on, those can be external factors that also change how your team might behave. And what I really like about just having some type of continuous ability to reflect and alter how you work is that you're basically forced to constantly evolve. And of course, the longer that you are working together on more consistent things, the changes that you make are probably closer to, tweaks or little optimizations. But having that opportunity in the first place is, I think, like the number one thing that I want to have on a team, so that regardless of what comes towards a team, whether it's people changing, whether it's focus areas changing, you have this opportunity at some cadence to say, we should try X and see if it works.
And that culture of, we will make changes, but every change we make is an experiment and not to be stamped into the culture of the way we work and cannot be touched, right?
That's exactly it.
We tried it. We like it. We don't. It goes in the garbage and we stop doing it. We do. Maybe we want to double down on it. Maybe we want to try something else.
We might have tried it way before and we want to try it again to see if things are different this time. But when you brought up, you said, pardon me, it was called Shape Up.
Yeah.
Shape Up. So, and regardless of Shape Up or something else, but organizations trying something out, going, hey, this works. Like, this works for us. And then giving it a name, documenting it, sharing it. Like, I get it. Like, for me, it would be working on some team. We try things out. It might, we start with Kanban or Scrum as a starting point because it's maybe a little bit more common, more understood. Evolve it, right? And by the time you're like, wow, I'm going to use the word gelling. We're really gelling here. By that point, it might look very different from Kanban or Scrum. Like, you maybe even move to a point where you're like, we basically do waterfall. And like, it just happens to work for the things that you're working on in the team you have. So it's like, I just really don't like assigning names to things unless you want to have a common starting point to be like, just so we're on the same page, let's start here and then go. But yeah, I just really was thinking about that when you were bringing up shape up and this idea of there's, a million ways or infinite ways that you could slice being truly agile, maybe without the capital A.
Right. And I guess like the amount of ability to influence and change this does not a little bit. It certainly is affected by other factors about the environment that you're in, including, do you have a product counterpart that can like get on board and also be willing to iterate on these processes? Or is it the kind of culture where like it's so separate that you really can't change or influence the product engineering interaction at all, and then you kind of know where your like boundaries are and you know your bubble? Or maybe
it's such a good point, because we're talking about processes, or just ways of paradigms for engineering teams, but it's not, you can't necessarily just isolate that, because the reality is it's probably a business and there's other stakeholders and those have to work together. Great point.
Yeah, it's one thing to say, here's the contract for how you work with our team, but if another team says that's like a necessary collaborator, and they say, well, that we can't conform to that contract because we work on this different cadence, or we want to provide things at a different level, and you're kind of like looking for this and we're working more macro, it like, you can see how it's not enough to say, I want to dictate how others work and interact with us. And so in those cases where you maybe have no control over that, then the bubble of influence that you can experiment with and change shrinks or lands somewhere else. But there's still plenty of opportunity for you to figure out where within your team your processes have bottlenecks or challenges, and what kinds of things you want to measure and optimize for. Absolutely. I would be interested to hear about the environment where there is no freedom to do any of that.
There's constraints, right? Like regardless of how you look at it, I guess that's maybe the most generic way to frame it, whether it's the product you're working on, like the particular projects, the stakeholders you have. It's engineering in general is going to have constraints. And sometimes you can push back a little bit, massage on those, make sure that the constraints you're dealing with can be altered in some capacity. But at the end of the day, unless it's just like your company and you want to dictate exactly how everything goes, which I probably wouldn't suggest unless you are, I don't know, the ultimate person in the universe. Like you need to be able to have some give and take in all capacities. So I think that when you have some of these constraints, maybe you can push back on product and other roles and say, what if we tried this and meet in the middle? But you basically take, if they're doing a similar process or similar paradigm where they're going, hey, we want to be nimble and try to approach things, like you're going to have to work together. So meeting in the middle, finding some common ground is going to be critical, but you ultimately cannot control everything. So,
right. Totally. I can't remember if I shared this in one of the past times we chatted or not, but when I was making some changes to a team I managed a while ago, I remember specifically talking about wanting to implement WIP limits.
Right.
And it was like the number I chose was number of devs divided by 2, maybe plus 1. I can't remember. And it was, I had like, the team was like, whoa,
how could we ever work?
that's wild. Like, yeah, like, but I don't understand. And I actually distinctly remember the subsequent race to pull a ticket into your name before the limit was hit, so that you didn't have to deal with the implications of the WIP limit already being hit before you had a ticket, which is really funny. But what was interesting is the pitch was, hey, as with everything, it's an experiment, and if you know me by now, then you know that if this doesn't work or solve the problems we're trying to solve, we won't keep doing it, but just do it. And the first sprint that we implemented it, the team's throughput more than doubled. And we measured that kind of data. So we went back to the team in retro and said, hey, the number of features the rate that of which features are getting merged is much faster now.
You gamed those numbers, didn't you? You just cut all the features into half the size. That's what you did.
It was incredible. It was so good. And ultimately, I think we changed some things, and we probably didn't stick with that. But it was really nice to be met with resistance, but then run the experiment and have a positive outcome.
Yeah,
for sure. And I think I'm also a believer in you can measure these things, and if you run an experiment and you don't like the outcome, you can throw it away. I also think an alternative is things that people don't like or don't find useful ultimately fall to the floor. And so as long as you're not chasing pushing a rope in terms of do this thing, if you're willing to let things fall to the floor, then sometimes you'll run these experiments and maybe they will work for a few weeks, but then ultimately they actually don't continue to serve the team. And instead of a retro where someone explicitly says the metrics to support this process are no longer moving in the right direction, it might actually just be an unspoken thing that one day the team kind of stops doing or it slowly dies off.
And it's almost like you don't even have to have rules around forming the rules. It just happens naturally.
Right. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I wanted to ask you a question, and we haven't chatted about this before, so I don't want you to be nervous. I'm setting you up for something here, but I think you probably have a really insightful opinion on this. But I mostly see this in I don't want to say they're clickbait headlines, but maybe they are for engagement. But I haven't really seen this before this year, and I'm not trying to say that it's only happened this year, but I'm seeing more
in the last 24 days.
Yeah, that's right. But honestly, yeah, basically in the last month almost. Yeah, sorry, that was poor phrasing on my part. But so in the last approximately 24 days, I've been noticing that people are making bold claims Agile just doesn't work, and we've proven that it doesn't work. That's it. It just doesn't work. It's been proven. And I don't know. I wanted to kind of put that in front of you. I have some thoughts on that, but my problem is that for me, that's such a triggering phrase that I almost don't want to read anymore, because I don't even want to give in to the person with their title trying to trigger me, because I know it's working. Mm-hmm. But I've scanned a little bit, and people are trying to make arguments about Agile not working, and some things that come up are basically, and I'm obviously paraphrasing and overgeneralizing, but along the lines of it's an excuse to have crappy software. Agile is just an excuse to let crappy software get rushed out. And that's it. That's what it is. That's why it's failing. We're doing ourselves no favors by supporting Agile. And I find it pretty fascinating, but I was curious, and I don't know if you've seen that or if you have thoughts that are kind of racing through your head now, but I wanted to ask you that for your input. Sorry again for putting you on the spot.
Are these just popping up on LinkedIn because people can't shout it out on Twitter anymore, or what's the?
I think that's exactly what it is. The more active I've been on LinkedIn, the more of these corners of LinkedIn I'm seeing. But I think I've seen it on Medium too, and a couple other spots. So
no, I mean, I certainly, now that I reflect on it, I have seen a trend an uptick in people's kind of sharing that I don't think it's a new perspective. I think it's getting more traction.
It's only the last 24 days. That's the only time it's existed.
It's never a thought that's been had before. I think a lot of these critiques take the position of they draw the parallels to the Agile analogy is, you want to build a car for somebody, and then you actually start with a scooter, and then you make a skateboard, and then you make a bicycle, but these people live in the Arctic and they can't ride a skateboard because of all this that's kind of roughly what I think I've seen.
Okay.
And my reaction to it is always well, the whole point of Agile is to be willing to shift and pivot your, I guess, your path in response to like validating or invalidating assumptions that you made. And that's all it's really supposed to be, I think. I wish I could rattle off all the lines of the Agile Manifesto, but I do
you don't
love
have
that
them tattooed on your hand or anything.
Yeah, let me check. Hold on. But the like value, like working software, it is in it. So it's like, well, it's not an excuse for crap software. I think that's like a false, what do you want to call it? Like, I think people are falsely equating modern free SaaS platforms with agile development, where it's like Google can ship something and the users aren't paying. And so when there's issues, like you can kind of experiment more with your users because they haven't given you like a bunch of money to deliver on a specific promise. And so I think there's this like false equivalency between, testing in production is just making your users experience the bugs and the crappiness of your software, and all this like agile stuff is around like delivering like the least that you can and the lowest quality, which is actually like entirely not true. You should certainly have a established definition of done for what you're delivering, and you choose to set the quality bar on that definition of done. I think what people are missing is the fundamental challenge in waterfall, and it's not always wrong in every environment, but the challenge is what all companies used to do is say, all right, we're going to have our business analysts come up with a thing that we want to build for our users, and then we're going to like break that down into everything it needs to do and anticipate everything that the users will be able to accomplish with it, and we will plan it all, and then we'll build it to the schedule, which by the way was like almost always over budget and over time because you can't estimate that much stuff up front anyway. And then it ships and like half the features don't get used, or like false assumptions were made, and like companies would potentially tank as a result of this in the worst case scenario. And so it's not to say that Agile is saying you're not trying to accomplish that product that you were building, but a bunch of the assumptions you made, you're able to validate early by running the right experiments. And the experiments don't mean build crap. They mean like reduce your scope to validate the usefulness, to validate the effectiveness, to validate that the approach you chose is actually what users want to do. And you can do that through tons and tons of upfront studies. But guess what? If you're going to do those upfront user experience studies, you're probably using things like interactive mockups, which is, guess what? Something like an early iterations, which you could just ship to you. So it's like, I don't know. Maybe there's something to it. I just don't see it. I think the critique of like Agile doesn't work is actually just the critique of poorly implemented Agile.
That's, I think, in a nutshell, my stance on it. So I'm trying to recall.
Is that a nutshell? It was more of a tirade.
Yeah, I think that that's how I would express like my perspective on that, is that it's someone who's making claims like this is observing other people implementing Agile, however that is defined to them, and saying like they're creating crappy software as a result. And I just think in my head, I'm like, well, you could pick anything you want to do, and maybe that group is still going to create crappy software. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily the cause of it. And or perhaps it is the cause of it, but it's not because it's Agile's fault. And again, I'm not sitting here trying to defend Agile, because I've already said I don't even like using the word. Yeah. I just talk about continuous improvement. So like, don't get me with the pitchforks. But like that, it just bothers me, because I think that it's like just using like I don't even know what the phrase is, like taking like broad strokes with a paintbrush kind of thing. Like you're just painting everything with the same, and whatever, that quote, use that. And I think from some of the perspective I've seen is that a lot of it comes back to like software architecture too. Like there was no like being having framing for agile is just allowing you to have like poor software architecture. Like you just rush through it, you don't plan for things. And I'm like, okay, so I'm not a software architect. I've built at least a thing or two, maybe even 3 in my day. And I like to take approaches that are extensible in terms of how software is designed. So it's modular, it's flexible, it's extensible. It's not going to be perfect, but that's the point, is that no matter how much work you do ever, and I would love for someone to challenge this, you cannot possibly predict everything. You could literally have all of the information from your potential customers and go, cool, we're going to build the perfect thing. And then you go build it. And then something external happens where, like, I don't know, some other company built it right before you did. And now you're like, cool. They released the perfect product that we were just about to click the submit button on to push it to prod. And now what? Now you have to do something different. And you didn't plan for it. Like, it's impossible to plan for every possible thing. So the way that I look at it is that as long as you're able to have extensible software architecture, and within your sort of organization, your paradigm just allows you to evolve in some capacity, then you will, I mean, if you're sourcing everything properly, you're doing iterations, you're going to come up with good conclusions and build good things. And like, I just think that that's it. So calling Agile a fail, I think, is like, maybe, and again, I haven't read all of these in detail, but maybe maybe they're trying to make the claim like people are still really bad at implementing Agile, which, if that's the case, like, yeah, I agree, because I think a lot of people say we're Agile, and then it's like, well, show me the agility. And, well, we did a sprint. We did that.
Yeah. Yeah, it has, I think that's probably one of the failures. Is that the right word for it? One of the things that maybe didn't set Agile up for like pure success was this like kind of obsession with ceremonies.
Yeah.
And I think like when you look at it, it's like, well, those ceremonies were designed to serve some purposes, but they're not like the thing, right? They're not the reason. So I don't know, thinking more about, I'm kind of in your camp in that, like, I don't really care about Agile necessarily. I think if you care about Agile, you support the Agile manifesto. Like, that's like it, right? If you're truly like someone who's like, no, I do believe in the spirit of Agile, then what you actually believe in is like the things that were kind of codified into the manifesto, but not necessarily subscribing to like the need for specific frameworks or whatever.
Totally.
What's interesting to me is one of the books I really enjoyed that was very helpful in thinking about product delivery was Escaping the Build Trap by Melissa Perry. And it's purely a book about product. It's for product managers, people who work in the product departments. But as an engineering leader, and even as an engineer, it's really useful in thinking about how you can deliver things iteratively and not just building things for the sake of building things. And like, when you like unwind that, that's also Agile. It's like the Melissa takes like real situations that existed, but then like kind of like fictionalizes them just for the sake of the story. But, you know, she gives examples where you want to build a thing where like a customer can upload a spreadsheet and like a bunch of computations happen and something is generated for them, more or less. And she talks about how like a plausible first iteration might be that you just have 1 or 2 people who sit and wait at an email inbox. And when a user submits a spreadsheet, all it does is email it to the inbox, and those people go and do the thing manually and then like ship the report. And it's just a black box, and the customer thinks you've got some super fancy tech that did a thing, but it's really just Mechanical Turk behind the scenes, like doing the thing. But guess what? You either learn that it works and then you invest in writing the code, or you learn like, holy crap, guess what? Like, users really struggle with building the sheet that they're expected to upload against the exact template. And we actually found that the humans behind the scenes had to do a lot of like interpretation because people couldn't conform to the template. Like that's really important to know. And I think it's so interesting to me that like that's another example of something that is not like under the Agile umbrella, but it is under kind of the like iterative framework umbrella. And the idea is you could spend a long time proactively thinking about what's needed and investing in building that. But this is a big problem that startups encounter as well, is like if you spend too long building the thing, you might run out of money.
Yeah.
Or you might not have vetted product market fit, and you might hit the market and flop. And so why would you invest so much upfront in something? And that's like true at the like, hey, I'm building a company scale. And that's true at the I want to deliver a feature as an engineering team scale. Don't overinvest without validating. So
that's like, I totally resonate with everything you said there. That just really aligns with my beliefs. I was thinking about a good takeaway and for me, and it honestly is just going back to some of the stuff you were saying at the beginning of this, and it's a lot more of a generalization, but you said that you had done something and I was like, I need to be better at this. And my takeaway from this conversation has been that, like I mentioned, kind of similar to what you do, is that going into something, observing initially and try not to make dramatic changes. But I think I probably expressed this to you before and perhaps on the podcast, that I have a tendency to lean so hard into that if the team is having inaction, then it's almost like I become complacent with it because, oh, they're not needing it. Clearly, they're not suggesting it. And even though I feel like I'm trying to give them a safe place to fail and that kind of stuff, experiment, like at some point, I probably need to say, look, I'm going to shake things up a little bit. And then I don't want to do it like day one. I don't know what the right time frame is, whether it's a year, day two, like, something, and try to figure out at what point do I feel like I have enough evidence. But what you did that I really like is that you didn't say, hey team, I'm here to blow stuff up. You waited, you observed, then you went to like tech leads of some capacity, right? Some type of people that have a little bit of leadership within the team, and you got them to work with you on it. Like now it's also their idea. And I think that's critical. So I want to lean more into that so that I have a bit more of a stepping stone to take action versus, hey, like I guess it's just working well enough for them. I'm not pushing that way.
For anybody potentially listening, if anybody listens and is struggling with a similar problem, I'm going to shill 2 books. One book called The First 90 Days. It's a framework for taking on a new role or starting at a new company or kind of like moving whatever in your career, and how to approach the literally the first 90 days of doing that, in terms of, they roughly frame it, I'm probably going to screw this up a little bit, but they roughly frame it, the first 30 days is like just observing, watching, measuring, making some kind of observations and formulating some thoughts for yourself. The next 30 days up to 60 days in your tenure is, okay, start kind of like looking for advocates and allies and peers that you think would kind of subscribe to what you're suggesting. And then the final 30, okay, make a plan, propose a plan, and start like executing against it. So you can have impact in the first 90 days without showing up and saying like, I'm going to change things and be met with resistance. Right. That's one. And the other one is a book called It's Okay to Be the Boss. It's really, really good for thinking about how we counteract a potential overcompensation into like, everybody went, oh my God, like micromanagement is so bad. We're going to back off and like hands off. And what the book tries to talk about is high performers actually prefer some level of management involvement. And what happens is when you back off too far, you lose high performers, and low performers love an environment where you're not kind of like there and on top of things and managing things. And so then they will bring along for the ride people who would also prefer to work in that environment. And all your high performers who are looking for more hands-on management go somewhere else. And so it's helpful for people who are wondering like, I don't want to like impose myself too much as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
It helps provide kind of a bit of a framework and some guidance around how to navigate those things.
Well, I don't read books, but I think
I'm sure they have them in audiobook format.
But I know
there's a diagram somewhere.
If someone has a picture of this book, that would be good enough. No, I've heard you mention the first 90 days before, but that second one I've never heard. And exactly what you described just sounds like me. Like it's sort of a fault of that I've identified for myself where I'm avoiding trying to be like a micromanager so much that I don't take action probably when I need to.
Awesome. Well, we talked a little bit about Agile, and we talked a little bit about change management, I guess. But yeah, overall, pretty interesting food for thought, I think.
Yeah, and well, thank you for sharing resources. It's something that, like I said, I have a book sitting here that I got. It's on my desk, so I'm like not opposed. There's books in the background, like. I don't hate books. I prefer to do things, and like that's how I learn.
You prefer to have them nearby.
Yeah, I think it's like osmosis or something, right? If they're just nearby, it kind of goes in. But I don't think it's been working. So I think I might actually try the word approach where I put the words into my eyes. So we'll see how that goes. But Graeme, thank you so much again. Like I said, I always have a takeaway, and like I'm always learning, and I think talking through this stuff is awesome. It's always insightful, so I'm just excited to see if I can try making some changes for myself.
Cool. I'll grill you next time.
Okay, yeah. Well, hopefully that wasn't too bad. I think you did well on the grilling, so awesome. Well, thanks, Graeme, and thanks, folks, for watching. If you want to do us a favor, like, subscribe, leave us a comment if you have thoughts on what we discussed, or if you have other topics you'd like to hear about, and we're happy to take you up on it. So we'll see you next time.